If your pastor or, preferred apologist or theologian only feels the need to speak up when there's an opening to hit the right, you should be concerned. Anytime you're running to keep up with the culture, that should be a concern. I was watching everything, some of which I knew not to be true, go completely unchallenged in all of these Christian media platforms. So people asked me, why is it women doing this? And I'm the first to say, I do believe that men should be leading the charge on that. But institutionally, we didn't have a lot of men speaking up. You're out there, but there hasn't been that many of you. And yet that's what Scripture calls you to do as leaders.
This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture. When speaking the truth can cost you your platform, your reputation, and even your livelihood, courage becomes essential for anyone who seeks to stand firm. Today's guest is one of those truth tellers. It's my good friend, Megan Basham, an author and journalist for the Daily Wire, known for her fearless reporting and her willingness to ask hard questions, especially within the evangelical world. This conversation was recorded at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, where Christian leaders gathered to consider the responsibility of communicating truth in a rapidly shifting culture. You can watch this episode on Coleridge Ministries streaming platform at crm.tv or on the Coleridge Ministries YouTube channel. And you can listen on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. If you value courageous, biblically grounded truth tellers, would you pause and leave a 5-star review? It helps more people discover Coleridge Ministries. And now, please welcome Megan Basham to the City of God. Megan Basham, so glad to have you on the City of God podcast. I think you were on a Zoom episode, so it's great to have you in person.
Yes, it's good to be here in person. I'm a huge fan of what y'all do, so it's exciting to be here. So I actually do listen to the Coleridge Ministries podcast.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. That's awesome. You catch a lot of heat for this.
I do.
But you have really led the way in so many ways, really exposing kind of the corruption and the toxic teaching that's happening in Big Eva. Mm-hmm. Kind of what gave you the passion, the courage, and even kind of the insight to even pursue uncovering what's really going on behind closed doors?
It's funny because people talk about the courage, and I'm like, I didn't feel courageous at the time. It's not like I thought I was doing something brave. I think I didn't know that other people didn't do that. Like, I came out of journalism and you name names and you're specific. And so, professionally, I got there because I was at a Christian magazine for like 15 years and I am a mom working from home, and it was a smaller job and I loved it. But the woke wars kind of came to my Christian magazine. And when that happened, I started going, okay, well, what's happening here? Like when we were suddenly running stories from, some of these, which I didn't know at the time, but now know were social justice warrior young reporters about how we could talk more about our white privilege and that kind of thing. I was just sitting there going, it was the first I'd heard of that kind of terminology. And I went, this doesn't sound biblical. What's happening? And then I kind of started hearing the same thing from like my kids' school, their Christian school, or the church we were at the time. And it was just like I was aware that things were coming into the church that felt off to me, even though I did not have the knowledge of like somebody like a Vodi Bakum or something to go, here's theologically where it's off. It just didn't sound right. And so there was some headbutting, within the organization. And at about that time, the Daily Wire came to me and offered me a job. And, they were looking for culture and general reporting and entertainment. And, I happily took it, but I told him, listen, I have some things I want to report on in the evangelical world. Would you guys be open to that? Because I think it's going unexplored. And they're like, yeah, come on over. That's fine. As long as, it's good, solid reporting and you can support it, great. So I did. I came over to Daily Wire and did a couple of stories and they did well. And then I did the Francis Collins story. So I did the story about, head of NIH who was suddenly appearing on all these Christian platforms. And I was watching everything he was saying, some of which I knew not to be true, go completely unchallenged in all of these, Christian media platforms. So you had people giving their pulpits.
And not only unchallenged, but endorsed by evangelical pastors.
Yes, exactly. And so I that was the piece that kind of broke open everything. I wrote that piece. So many other people, it resonated with them and with the experiences they were having. And then a publisher called me and said, hey, is there more material like this? Do you think there would be a book? And at that time, I was not aware of how much left-wing funding was actually driving this. But God opened all of these doors. So it wasn't like I was looking for it. It just happened. And so here I am, kind of a mom, just doing my thing. And it blew up in a way I never expected.
Yeah. And that book, of course, is Shepherd's for
Shepherd.
Sale. Yeah. What do you feel like? I mean, obviously, as we kind of jokingly said, you got a lot of heat for it.
Yeah.
But tell me the positive responses, because I don't think we focus enough on that.
Yeah.
I know there's positive stories and testimonies of how helpful that book has been for the North American church and really exposing what was going on.
So the amount of support I received from like your ordinary average evangelical in the pews, that's been overwhelming. And I think it's because, one, it wasn't like I was telling them something that they totally had no knowledge of. I think a lot of people went, yeah, it felt off to me too.
Heard things, I saw the red flags.
Yes, and so they
just couldn't put it together.
Exactly, and so they were kind of like me. Like initially, it felt wrong to me, and I was coming along and explaining to them, here's why what you were experiencing was happening. And then, just here at NRB, I can tell you probably one of the most positive experiences I've had, and I won't name names because I don't know if he wants me to, but I just met a pastor who was a part of one of the organizations that I reported on in the book, the Evangelical Immigration Table. And he came over to me and he said, I didn't know I was a part of it. I didn't know that's where the funding was coming from. When I joined it, they told me that, we wanted a secure border. And it turned out, I later found out that was not what they were about. And he did what I have never heard from so many of these other people who were involved in these things, is he said, I got it wrong. And I had to tell my people, hey, I got it wrong. And I pulled out of that organization. So I'm not involved anymore. And that was maybe the most positive response I've ever heard, because I went, that's what I wanted.
Yeah, change is happening.
Yeah, I'm like, I believe in leadership. I believe in institutions. So I'm not, here trying to
you're not anti-establishment.
Exactly.
Right.
In fact, I took pains
but you want truth tellers.
Exactly. And that was why I took pains in the book to say, don't abandon church. Go to church. Just find a good church.
Yeah. So let's help our audience. So there might be people listening to this podcast and go, okay, maybe I'm in one of those churches.
Right.
What are the red flags? What are the buzzwords that the average Christian layperson should be listening for, watching for in their local church?
Well, for one thing, the buzzwords change all the time.
Sure.
And so that's something you need to be aware of. Like a few years ago, it was white privilege.
Yep.
We've talked about how with COVID and so many of the other issues, it was love your neighbor. Or with climate change regulation, it was creation care. And on some level, all of those things can be not really white privilege, but the others can be okay, maybe to a certain level. It's how they were being used. And so one of the things I would say that is the biggest red flag to me is if your church has suddenly glommed on to whatever is the major cultural issue with Hollywood and academia and the corporate world. And suddenly your church is now really invested in it too, but they're baptizing it with some kind of churchy language.
Yeah.
Exactly like when it was Me Too.
Yep.
We had every, major left-wing institution suddenly saying, oh, we're against this kind of abuse of women. And of course, we're all against abuse of women.
Yep.
But we now see there were very unbiblical excesses with that.
Yep.
And if your church was suddenly interested in this issue and never had been before, that would be a red flag to me. So I go, anytime you're running to keep up with the culture, that should be a concern.
Yeah. But it is amazing. I mean, not only was it subtle, especially the last 5 years, but when you saw pastors and evangelical leaders attending Black Lives Matters rallies, and say, I don't agree with everything here, but we're all fighting for justice and we're all fighting for equality under the law.
Right.
It was amazing how all of a sudden these pastors that never wanted to be political, all of a sudden hitched their wagon to these leftist, progressive political movements.
And if they only speak, because I'm the first to say, look, when the Trump administration, for example, came out and said, we're going to have to be flexible on the Hyde Amendment.
Sure.
Christians should immediately go,
absolutely.
No, we're not.
Yep.
Not going to be flexible on that an inch.
Sure.
And so, that is a time to raise your voice and say, we're going to push back. But if your pastor or, preferred apologist or theologian only feels the need to speak up when there's an opening to hit the right, you should be concerned. I can give you a really prominent example I saw recently.
Yeah.
And it was from an apologist who is never political, except when he can hit the right, though claiming to be a conservative. And it was on Greenland. It was just war policy. We need to talk just war policy and what Trump is doing with Greenland. And I thought, Man, that's for
Yeah.
somebody looking for an opening to hit the right, because we're not going to war with Greenland.
Exactly. I know.
Yeah.
But they'll stay silent on transgenderism.
Yes.
They'll stay silent on the sanctity of human life. They'll stay silent when Charlie Kirk's assassinated. It's amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
but
so
if they want to punch right, they'll do it all day long.
So their conscience wasn't burdened in those moments,
I know.
but it was suddenly burdened because of Greenland? Really?
Wow. Megan, you and I both agree that the battles we're fighting, this is a spiritual battle.
Absolutely.
And it really does come down to having a biblical worldview and really understanding and being a good exegete of the culture. What would you say are one or two of the predominant strongholds in our culture right now that Christians really need to be equipped to fight against?
I mean, one of them is definitely feminism, and I think we're seeing a complicated moment in the church where we recognized how steeped we are in a very feminized culture, and we don't quite know how to deal with it. So, I think there has been maybe some extreme reaction to that where, you've had guys who are like, women shouldn't even have a social media account because that's a public platform. And, to me, I've kind of jokingly said that's Sharia Christianity. We don't do that here. It's a little extreme. But on the other hand, I think they're getting at something that's legitimate. And that is that, yes, I do feel like, for example, over the last few years, it has been primarily a lot of women. Me, Rosaria Butterfield, Allie Beth Stuckey, Elisa Childers, and few pastors like you're out there, but there hasn't been that many of you who were out leading the charge and speaking out on this. And so people asked me, why is it women doing this? And I kind of had to go, well, to be quite honest with you, because institutionally, we didn't have a lot of men speaking up. And I'm the first to say, I do believe that men should be leading the charge on that, but they weren't. And I think part of the reason was because, for so many of us women, like an Elisa or Rosaria or me, we weren't really risking anything by speaking up. And I recognize that men are providers for their family. And so there was going to be a cost for them that at that time I wasn't going to have to pay because we didn't rely on my income. So it was pretty easy for me to say, hey, here's a problem in the church. But I want to say to those men, I appreciate that, you have your role in this institution and that you wanted to keep it. And yet that's what Scripture calls you to do as leaders, to speak out in courage. So you also, need to be, if you're in those positions of leadership, the people leading the charge. So, feminism, that's a big one. I think we're probably done with the Black Lives Matter and the DEI. I think, all of that's done. But obviously, we're going to have some big debates now on Israel. And I think there's a lot of ugliness. And there is, unfortunately, a lack of trust that is understandable in our institutions. But it has gone to such a deep degree that we're seeing the problem now is it's a little bit like judges. Nobody knows who to follow. So they're following some crazy things also. And that's going to be an ongoing problem.
So going back to feminism, the Apostle Paul says we not only tear down strongholds, but we tear it down with divine power.
Right.
How in the modern feminist movement, how do we respond with the Word of God and a biblical worldview to really fight against what's happening? And I even think about, I have a 13-year-old girl.
Yeah.
How for the young families out there, they're raising up a girl to be strong and courageous, to have a biblical worldview, but not to buy into the radical modern feminist movement.
One of the things I'm doing with my daughter is I'm not even being shy about saying, hey, we want you to go to college. We want you to do these things. If you feel that you have the ability, and she's a smart kid, so we're going to do that. But I'm not even a little bit shy in telling her, those are not my highest aspirations for you, though. If you have some sort of career, great. But your highest aspiration is mom and wife. And, I am interested in an MRS degree. Hopefully I would love for the Lord to bring you somebody at school. And I'm looking for that for you. Like, how do I put you in a place where you will meet someone godly who will lead you? And so, that's part of what I do is I think we don't be shy or embarrassed about that anymore. Because I think for a long time, it was almost like you can't tell your daughters that my highest ambition for you is to get married and have kids, because statistically, not just because biblically that's your role, and that's my number one reason, and it is, but also because statistically, we now have the social science research that's telling me you are going to be happiest and most fulfilled in your life if you prioritize marriage and motherhood over career. And we don't tell women that, and it's a fact. And I wanted to, our lives are long. Get into your 40s. And then maybe, God will open some new doors that you weren't expecting. But there's plenty of time for that. Prioritize having kids first.
That's a good word. Final question. In light of the research that you've done, in light of your book, what would your plea be to pastors in America right now in this cultural moment?
Ooh, that's a good question. Let me think about it. I mean, one would be, something is happening that I have started calling the Great Rehab Tour. And that is some pastors who maybe got caught up in some of these things are shifting sides, and they're kind of moving again, because now we're in a more conservative friendly era where you're seeing the tech titans, for example, journey to Mar-a-Lago and, pay their obeisance, which, fine. And so they're moving to get into a different sort of cultural position, let's say. And what I want to say is acknowledge the things you got wrong without just saying, I'm going to shift. Because one, I think it would be really meaningful to people to understand how we did it.
Yeah.
But it also allows us to continue to trust you.
What a good teachable moment.
Yes. That I'm like, then I can trust you.
Yeah.
If you just sort of pretended like you were never there, I can't trust you.
Yeah.
So, that's one. And I think maybe my other word to pastors is, and this will maybe be a little controversial, but this goes along with the feminism. There are always going to be, probably, if you have any good-sized church, a contingent of ladies in particular who are going to try to pull you in a direction that may not be necessarily biblical, because we as women have very soft hearts and we don't want to offend people and we don't want to make people uncomfortable. And so they want to pull you in that direction. And I want to encourage some pastors that you need to be hearing more from your hopefully all male elders.
Yeah.
And not from this contingent of women who do care and do have soft hearts. But there is a reason that we're not called to be the headship of the church.
Yeah, that's such a good word. Well, Megan, I appreciate what you're doing, how you are a truth teller. I always tell people that, especially our students that are wrestling with journalism and writing and reporting, that we need more truth tellers.
Yes.
In the area of journalism. Don't be dissuaded and discouraged by what you see, because we need more Christians in that space. Excited about your work with the Daily Wire and for being a great example for the next generation.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate what you guys are doing.
Thanks, Megan. It's always a pleasure to have Megan on the City of God. If you like what you've heard, you can find her reporting on the Daily Wire and give her a follow on X. Speaking of social media, be sure to follow the City of God on Instagram @CoralRidgeMin and follow me @Pacienza. We release new episodes of the City of God weekly, so make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. This City of God podcast is produced by Coral Ridge Ministries and made in partnership with the Institute for Faith and Culture. This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.